Okay, so you guys have your little laminated half-sheet palettes. Marissa, if anybody raises their hand and says they don't have one, can you get them one? I've got them in this blue bin up here in front of the whiteboard. I think I gave this half of the room one last time we met, but maybe not this half. Did you guys get a pallet? Anybody over here? Did you guys get pallets? They're little laminated half sheets. Yeah, get those out of your supply bag, and then Marissa's going to give everybody over here a half-sheet palette. We're using the half-sheet palettes as like a paint palette like this. If we all had like plastic paint palettes, then we would have to line up at the sinks to wash them. They'd have to sit in the dish rack, and we'd all be like up at the sinks for 20 minutes of the class period. So everybody's going to get their own laminated palette. If you could get your Sharpie and write your name on the back of your laminated palette.
From this side over?
Yeah, everybody on this side of the room needs one. So, and they all get their own. You need one too? Okay. So we're mixing really small amounts of paint today, so you're not going to need to wash this at the sink. At the end of the class period when we clean up, you're just going to be able to take your wet paper towel, wipe the paint off of the palette, and then it can go back in your supply bag. Okay? So everybody put your name with Sharpie on the back of your palette. And that way we can use this all year this year while we're mixing paints. Okay? And then what I would do is set up your workspace sort of like this. So I've got my paint palette handy next to my workspace. I've got all my cups of paint sitting open with the lids off to the side so they're out of the way. Anybody else need a paint palette sheet? You need one, sweetie? I've got my surface that I'm going to paint on set up handy right in front of me. And then I've got my other tools, paper towel, ruler, pencil, and a smaller paintbrush. Okay? When you are painting, I think it's a good rule of thumb to kind of just, especially for what we're doing, we're painting in small areas today, kind of just keep your paper towel handy. I usually paint when I'm doing something like this with, the hand that I would use to hold the paintbrush, holding the paintbrush, and the paper towel, I just keep it in my left hand. Before we get started though, last time we set up our paper, we just did our circle, and then we split our space up into quarters, and we need to go ahead and get all the rest of the spacing for our color wheel. So if you'll look up here and copy me what you need to do on your paper, we're doing a 12-part color wheel, so 12 hues are going to exist on this space, and we need to divide this up further. We have 4 quadrants right now. So if you look at what I'm doing here, I'm in the top right-hand part of the wheel, and all I need to do is I need to have 3 here, right? 3, 3, 3, and 3. Okay, so I'm just eyeballing and splitting this curve up with 2 little dashes so it looks like there's 3 equal parts. Okay, so I've got one there, and then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to match up that little dash with the middle of the wheel. And now look at what I'm doing. Instead of doing each little wedge by itself, I go all the way across. And I'm doing 2 at a time, okay? I'm doing the one over here, one over there. Same thing here. Laying my ruler on that little dash and then making sure the middle of the wheel, the ruler's lined up with both of those points. And then I'll draw a line all the way across. So now 2 of my quadrants have 3 wedges, okay? So we do that in one space, and then I'm going to do the exact same process over here in the top left. I'm just eyeballing. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just make them as even as you can. 2 dashes to divide up that spot into 3, and then I'm going to line up my ruler with the dash, the middle of the circle, draw a line across. So we should only have to add 4 lines to get our wheel split up into 12 spaces. And at that point, when you've got that far, we're not using our ruler anymore, so you can put that back in your supply bag. Okay, so we want to label this wheel. It's not just like random placement of colors. It's literally a chart that shows you the spectrum of colors. It's based on the prism of light, based on like the way a rainbow looks. It's all the same thing. There's only certain colors that can be mixed to make other colors, okay? So it matters what order they go in. We're going to label this just because you guys are looking up at the board every time I'm painting something in, and I don't want anybody to mess up on accident. We're going to go ahead and label it where we're putting the colors. And if you just divided your wheel up the same as I did, it shouldn't be a problem to kind of match up what we're doing. So the first colors we're going to put on are our primary colors. Our primary colors mix and make all the other colors that are on the color wheel. So we place those first, and they should be equal distance apart from one another on the wheel, meaning they never go side by side unless you've got like a kindergarten color wheel, just with 3 colors. So we're going to place red first, and I'm putting that in the middle spot of my top left part of the color wheel. I'm just putting red right there, okay? The middle wedge of the top quadrant of the wheel, all right? And then when you're just placing primaries, you're going to skip 3. So you skip 1, skip 2, skip 3. The 4th one over is your next primary color, and that should be yellow. Okay? And then we skip 1, skip 2, skip 3, and then this one is going to be blue. Red, yellow, and blue are going to be your primaries. When you mix 2 primaries together, you get secondary colors. All right, so those should go right in the middle between the 2 primaries that make them. Red and yellow are always going to make orange, so orange is going to go right here. Okay, yellow and blue are always going to make green, so green goes in the wedge that's right in between those. And red and blue are always going to make violet. Bless you. So that goes right in between red and blue. So at this point, you should have a color wheel that has a blank spot and then one that's labeled. Blank, then one that's labeled all the way around the wheel. Okay. So all that's left are the tertiary or intermediate colors. Okay. And that is going to be when you add a primary and a secondary together and mix them together, okay? They're longer names because you're just putting the 2 names together. You can abbreviate this to save space if you want to. That's what I'm going to do. So red and orange is going to be red-orange. I just put R-O. Orange and yellow makes yellow-orange. You always list the primary first in the color name, yellow-orange. And then we've got yellow-green. Then we have blue-green. Then we have blue-violet. And then we have red-violet. Okay, and that gives us all 12 hues. All right, on the color wheel, we're just dealing with the hue. So that's the pure natural color. All right. We know that we can make lots of different values of all of these colors, and those would be tints and shades by adding white and black, but today we're just dealing with the hue, all right? Okay. So if we have it all labeled, we're not going to need our pencil anymore, so you can put that to the side. What we're going to do first is fill in our primaries. So I want to talk about paint really quick before we get going. You've got a water dish. It should just be kind of in between you and whoever else is at your table so everybody can reach it easily. Try not to drip water on your paper. And because we're using Tempera paint, okay, this is washable. I would still, if you've got long sleeves on, push your sleeves up because the pigment can still stain like light colored clothing, but it would wash out of your clothes. You want to make sure, because Tempera paint is an opaque paint, okay? Each time you dip your paintbrush into this paint, we want it to look solid and not transparent when we paint with it, so it's important that your brush is dry every single time you dip it into the paint. Our brushes are all dry right now, but after we rinse it off and then we switch colors, you need to make sure that you rinse it off, dry it off, and then dip into the paint again. If you're trying to make your paintings look opaque and solid and your brush is wet, it's always going to look sort of like watercolor paint, and then you have to do like 5 coats before it looks solid. So it helps if your paintbrush is dry first. So we'll just dip into red. We'll start with that since that was the first one we labeled. And you can rotate your paper and go at it, you know, from whatever angle is going to be best for you. But I have a flat brush. You can see it's the tip, the bristles is sort of like a rectangular shape. If you've got a brush that's similar to that, it helps to use the flat edge to kind of outline the shape that you're filling in. And then you can fill in the interior to have good craftsmanship, make sure it looks neat. Some darker colors or more intense colors when you're painting on white, which we usually are, will still require a second coat to look totally opaque. And so you can just evaluate that as you work on your painting. Sometimes you just need to add more to it, do a second coat to make it look opaque. You don't want to see the brush marks or it to look sort of wishy-washy like watercolor paint does. Tempera paint dries pretty quickly, especially if you're just using it straight from, you know, what you mixed or from the paint cup. So it only takes a second to paint it in and then let it dry to do a second coat if you need it. And on a color wheel, it helps to paint in the order of the color categories. Skip around, do all the primaries, and then mix your secondaries, and then do the tertiaries, because oftentimes the tertiary colors are the ones that people will get wrong. They won't quite be the right color, and it helps if you've got all the colors on either side of them filled out already, so that you can kind of guess if you need to add more or less of each color. Okay, and if you finished, don't stress if I get a little ahead of you. If you have finished your red, you want to rinse out your brush. In the bottom of your water dish, there's one side of the water dish, which you can see right now because it's clean water, that has all these little vertical ridges in it. That's the side that cleans your brush. Mine is not like that, I just have Tupperware, but you can put your brush in and drag it back and forth over those ridges, and it gets all the paint out of the paintbrush up to the ferrule. This metal part is a ferrule that holds the bristles onto the handle of the brush. Sometimes paint gets stuck up there, and then it'll mix in your other colors and make them inaccurate. So if you put it down in the water dish and just drag it back and forth, it will clean out all that paint, and then you can just dry it off. And if you don't have a dish that has those little vertical ridges in it, just swish it around in the bottom of the brush. If you have brushes, we're using these right now, and they have pretty firm bristles, but sometimes we'll use watercolor brushes, and they're really soft and delicate. You always shape your bristles back if you have a brush like that, and your paintbrushes stay nice for a longer time. Okay, so now let's go to blue. So blue is darker. It's a pretty good chance we're going to need 2 coats on that. There's all different shapes and sizes of paintbrushes. If you've ever gone down the paintbrush aisle at like Hobby Lobby or Michael's, it might have blown your mind how many different kinds there are. And there's really cheap brushes and very expensive brushes that will last you a really long time if you take care of them. But artists choose a brush and the shape of the bristles based on the type of paint that they're using, the type of painting that they're doing. Sitting down at a table and painting is really different than standing up at an easel. And these brushes that are flats like this are really good for like geometric precision paintings, so that you can use the edge rather than like a round brush. And you can almost instantaneously go back over your first coat. If you do it too fast and it's not dry yet, you're just moving around the first layer. Yes?
I wasn't hearing anything for this.
So you need a compass then. Here you go. Yeah. And you're going to go at 1.5 inches. That's the size of the circle. Okay, and when you finish your blue, rinse your brush and dry it off. And then we can do yellow. Yellow is the least pigmented. It's the lightest color, so anytime you're mixing yellow, especially depending on like what brand of paint you're using, because all colors are not created equal when you're talking about different brands. Some pigments are stronger. There's different types of every color. There's different types of red, blues, and yellows. Some mix and make, like if you've ever like in elementary or middle school or just at home tried to mix up like a violet paint out of red and blue, and it's like you couldn't get a violet. It never really looked like a grapey sort of purple. It's because all reds and blues are not created equal. There's really warm reds and blues, and there's really cold reds and blues, and you have to have certain combinations of them to make like those, you know, quote unquote perfect colors that you're thinking of. And so when you're mixing with your yellow, it's not always like, if I want to make orange, it's not always half red and half yellow to make that. Depends on what kind of orange you want. And yellow is just lighter, so you're going to need a little more of it. So that gives us our primaries. And next we want to make our secondary colors. And that means we're going to have to do a little bit of mixing. So I know that this seems very like elementary review, and I like to start everything off with that because you can't assume everybody's even mixed with paint before. Some kids have, it's been a while since they had an art class. So we always start with review stuff, that way everybody's in the know. So we'll start off with green, okay? So look up here really quick so that you can see what I'm doing. You will waste a whole lot less paint if you mix your colors like this. First of all, be thinking about the fact that we're filling in just tiny little wedges on a piece of paper. We do not need a ton of paint, okay? I just need a little bit. So I'm going to take 2 scoops of yellow and put it on my palette, and then I'm going to wash my brush. Do not double dip into different colors, like your brush is messy and we just need a little bit more blue, but it has green on our brush, and so it's like you don't want to waste the time to wash it off and dry it off and everything. You'll mess up your paints. And you're not sharing them, they're all yours, and you don't want to mess them up where we use these for a while. So I did 2 scoops of yellow, and here's the important part. I'm just dipping my brush in the blue, okay? I didn't even really scoop it. Look up here and see how much I have, okay? I'm putting that next to my yellow, and I'm mixing in a little bit at a time. This is the biggest tip I can give you for not wasting your time and mixing up like half a cup of paint when you didn't mean to, because you keep having to add something in. I'm mixing a little bit of blue, stirring it in, add a little bit more, stir it in, a little bit more, stir it in. You might use all of what you put down, you might not. But if you just dip into your second color and then put it right smack dab into the first and start mixing it all, it might have been too much. And then you got to keep adding to it and adding to it. I actually think I want to go a little darker than that, so I'm going to wash my brush, dry it off. I'm going to add in a little more blue. Okay, I like this green. So I'm going to use this green. All right. And when you've got like a similar green to that, you can paint in your green wedge. And we're going for sort of like a hunter, like camo green. And it's darker, so it's definitely going to take 2 coats to be opaque. And if we were ever using tempera paints in class and you were having to work from home and you didn't have tempera paints at home, you could always, if you have your supply kit, you've got that watercolor palette, so that's our good backup. Watercolors are different from tempera. They're still water soluble, which means you mix water with them to use them. But the more water you add to a watercolor pigment, the more transparent your color is going to get. All of the color theory aspects of it are the exact same, but watercolor is very much about using transparent layers of color versus dipping into a paint and you want it to be opaque. You can get a similar look with tempera that you can with watercolors by watering it down intentionally. But watercolors are made to be really transparent. So like if you were doing this at home and you were using watercolor paints, you would mix some water with the paint that's dried in your palette, but you wouldn't scoop up the watercolor paint with your brush. You would just brush a wet brush over the top of it to use it. Okay, so if you're done with your green, rinse your brush off, dry it off, and then we'll go to orange next. So a different spot on your palette. Same idea, it's going to take a little more yellow, so I'm going to put 2 scoops of yellow, wash my brush, and then I'm going to dip once in red and put it to the side of my pile of yellow. And then I'm mixing a little bit of the red with the yellow at a time. And you can always add some more yellow or get some more red until you adjust it to the point where you feel like it's accurate. And this is the orange I want, okay? You don't want it to have too much red or it's going to look like red orange. You don't want it to be too light or it's going to look like yellow orange. We want almost like, if it means anything to you, like a Tennessee Vol orange. And always try, like if you're going to have a second or a third coat of paint, or you're working on a painting and you need to have some of that color in different places in the painting to unify it, if you've mixed up a custom color, try to use it in all the places where you want to use it while you have it mixed. Because if you know what I'm talking about, if you've ever done this before, you mix up this perfect color, you use it somewhere, later you need it again, and you're sitting there for 30 minutes trying to make that exact same color again. Sometimes it's a pain to do that because when paint dries, it looks a little bit different than what it looked like when it was wet. Okay, and I know some people are still painting orange, that's okay. Our last one's going to be violet. So this time your blue is a little bit stronger than the red is, but they're a lot more equal than the yellow. But same idea, anytime you're mixing a color, drop your colors that you're mixing on the palette next to each other instead of right on top of each other. And then you can mix a little bit of both together until your pile of paint is what you want color-wise, but also large enough of an amount to paint in the space that you're painting. And this time we want to get like a grapey purple color. And when you've got what you feel is accurate, you can paint in your violet space. So now we've got our 3 primaries and our 3 secondaries, and you should be left with 1 filled, 1 blank, 1 filled, 1 blank, all the way around the wheel. Okay. So the good thing, normally when you're painting, you're not painting a color wheel. Like we just do this to review beforehand. But when you've already got some paints mixed up that are the secondary colors on your palette, if you had any left over that were still sitting there, we can just reactivate those a little bit and still use them. Tempera paint is not necessarily my paint of choice when I'm painting for myself, but you can reuse these paints just like you can with watercolor paints by getting just a little bit of water on your brush and then going back to a place where they're dry and re-wetting it and letting it soak in and then mixing it back up. And then you can use it again. You want to be careful about how much water you add, because it will just make it more transparent. So you just need enough to like rehydrate it. But if you had some paint left over on your palette, as we start mixing these tertiaries, you can just add more of whatever it needs so that it is that color. So I'm going to start off with yellow orange. All right. I have some orange already on my palette, so I'm going to take a little bit of it and move it over somewhere else. And if this is my perfect orange, and I want to make yellow orange, I know I just need to add some more yellow to this. But you want to add enough yellow where obviously your new color doesn't look like yellow, but it doesn't look too much like the orange either. So you mix it up and then you just hold your paintbrush in that space. You can even put, sometimes you can even put like a little swipe. I would encourage you, because this color is going to be so light, if you want to test and see if it looks right, do it on the outside, like in the margin area. You could put a little swipe and look and see, okay, does that look light enough? I think I want to make mine a little bit lighter, so then I know I need to add a little more yellow. So the tertiary or intermediate color shouldn't look like either color that's on the left or right of it. It should look like it just naturally fits in between. And it's sometimes, especially with the ones that are on either side of yellow, you really need to put 2 coats of it for it to look like the color that it is. It'll get a little bit deeper when you add the second coat. If you ever painted in a wedge on the color wheel and then you're like, that was not, I mean, I did a real great job painting in a triangle, but that's not the right color. With tempera paint, if you try to paint like white tempera paint, we don't have that out right now, but if you painted that on top of something where you messed up, when you paint back on top of the white once it's dry, remember that water is going to reactivate the paint every time. So it'll start mixing with whatever you have on top if you're really like brushing over that spot. So you want to try to have it right the first time, but you can kind of blend over the top with white and then just gently lay in a color on top of it. And since we already played with the orange a little bit, we'll go ahead and do red-orange for our next one. So I still have red on my palette next to my orange where I made it the first time. Another good tip when you're mixing like this and we're making all the colors is to not mess up your whole pile. Like this whole pile I have of orange, I'm not going to mix that whole thing away because as long as it's on my palette, I can see the difference between this red-orange that I'm trying to make and what I had originally. If I use all of it, I'm just going by my dry example. So I'm adding a little bit of red to my orange. And again, we don't want this to look like the red, but it's going to be much deeper than the orange. Uh-oh. There we go. And then next, let's go to red violet. So if you still have some of your violet paint, we're just going to take some of that you have and mix more red into it. You're going for sort of like almost like a fuchsia burgundy-like color. If it dried a little bit, just add just a little touch of water, and then you can reconstitute it so you can paint with it again. It's like a raspberry color. And when I was making my red violet, I kind of used a lot of my pile of violet paint that I had. So if I wanted to take this red violet and then I wanted to make blue violet, what would I do to it? I would just add more blue than I would have if it was violet, and I can switch it back the other way on the color wheel. So that's what I'm going to do with this, just because I used so much of my violet. I'm just going to take a clean brush, get some blue, always sit it next to the paint, not directly down into the pile of it. And then I'll mix in a little bit at a time. So now it's back to a normal violet with that scoop. Push in a little bit more. And I actually think I want just a little bit more blue than that. So I'll get another scoop of it. And that's a good blue violet right there. And then I'm going to go with blue-green next. So you've still got some green that's wet and usable. You can use that, and if not, you can make some more. And we're going to add blue to it. Typically, this is sort of like a dark teal or a dark turquoise, but sometimes, remember, like we're using this is a Blick Tempera that we're using today. And sometimes you'll get like a darker blue-green or a lighter blue-green, depending on the brand, or if you've got a warm or cool blue that you're using. This one's going to be a deeper one. I'm going to keep adding, but both blue and green are pretty dark, so I'm going to keep adding a little bit of blue until I feel like I'm at the color that I want. It'll be like a deep, dark teal. Okay, and then our last one is yellow-green. This is going to be mostly yellow with just a little bit of green. So I'm going to move some yellow over here onto my palette, and then I'll scoop a little bit of the green I already have. You want to get like a bright lime green. Like this is as close as you can get to like making a neon with regular pigments. And again, you can test it. Because like if you made your original green too light, sometimes it's hard to make a good yellow green, and maybe that means you need to go back and change your green. So you can add a little more yellow. Remember, you want it to look like it should fit evenly in between your green and your yellow. So if it looks closer to one or the other, you're not there yet. And when you feel like it looks like a good yellow-green, paint in that last wedge of our color wheel. And remember, since we're doing this on white, it's probably going to take 2 coats for it to look like the right color. Just art teacher in a way. So when you look at your finished wheel, you should have a different color in each one. Usually it sticks out, like if you've got 2 wedges that are too close to being the same, it like your eye goes there, okay? And you can see that maybe something needed another coat of paint, maybe a color was just slightly off. There was no really any creativity with what we did today. We were just practicing mixing and paint application and talking about cleanup and, you know, getting supplies out, how to use our brushes and things like that. So when I grade this square on your booklet, it's really just going to be that your colors are accurate and your painting is neat, okay? So we didn't really do anything super creative with it. And I'm not worried about, like, I did little color checks on the outside too. I'm not worried about that in terms of neatness. All right. So check your colors, see if you think you're good or if you need to edit anything. I think actually by the time we need to clean up, these are probably going to be dry because Tempera dries so quickly. But like if we were using acrylic paint, it would take a little bit longer to dry. Or if it was like right at the bell ringing, we would normally use the drying rack. I got it out because I wasn't sure how much time we were going to have, but I think we'll be good to keep these in your containers. So the last thing I want to cover before I stop this recording is clean up while we're in the class. So the first thing you want to do when you're ready to clean up is put your caps back on your paint. And if you're still finishing your color reel, that's fine. Keep painting. We want to cap the paint. Okay. Make sure your brush is rinsed and totally dry before you put it back in your supply bag. All right. And then you're going to use the paper towel that you already had if it's still salvageable, like if you still have some usable space on it to clean with. If not, you can get extra paper towel. You can use the spray bottles, but I would wipe off as much paint as you can off of your palette before you spray it because it's just going to get messier before it gets cleaner. Wipe off your palettes at your seat. We're not going to clean them at the sink, okay? So wipe off as much paint as you can. Then you can get an extra paper towel. I'll be coming around with the trash can in just a minute so we can throw away all of the paper towels. And we're going to have time, I believe, by the time we're done cleaning, to go back to finishing the value sphere. So if we do have time, that's where we'll